we met because I called him and said, "Hello, Dr. Barry Prizant." He said, "Yeah." I don't even know how I got your phone number, frankly. We have the same publisher. Maybe that was it. But I said, "You don't know me. My name's Dave, and I love you." And, and so apparently that's what I said. So he sat down and was like, "I'm listening."
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. This week, I'm excited to bring you a conversation with Dr. Barry Prizant and Dave Finch about their new podcast, Uniquely Human, titled after Barry's revolutionary book, Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism. Uniquely Human, the podcast, continues the conversation the book started on autism and neurodiversity by amplifying the voices of autistic individuals and thought leaders, and provides insightful, cutting-edge, and practical information about the autistic experience. Barry Prizant is one of the world's leading and innovative authorities on autism, who has found a naturally complementary co-host in writer and creative consultant Dave Finch, who himself was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum as an adult and is the author of a wonderful book, The Journal of Best Practices, a memoir of marriage, Asperger's syndrome, and one man's quest to be a better husband. Our conversation covers a lot of ground. As Barry and Dave tell us about their respective books, Dave provides insight into the key to his relationship with wife Kristen after receiving his Asperger diagnosis a few years after they got married. And then Barry and David tell us all about their unique collaboration, how the Uniquely Human podcast came about, and the vision they have for the show. If you haven't heard my previous conversation with Barry Prizant, please be sure to check out Tilt Parenting episode number 99, where we have a deep conversation about his book, Uniquely Human. All right, and now here is my conversation with Dave and Barry. Hey, Barry and Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
So now we're going to do this dance where there's two guests and one host, but we'll work it out. So if you're a longtime listener of this podcast, you've heard Barry talk about his book, Uniquely Human. Dave is a new guest to the show. So I want to spend just a little bit at the head of this conversation talking about each of your books. So Barry, you wrote the book, Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism, which, you were recently even in my book club for my membership community. I'm a big fan of that book and still consider it to be very breakthrough in terms of the books that are available for parents and caregivers and anyone who wants to better understand autism. So can you just tell us a little bit about that book and why you wrote it and how it's been received in the world?
Sure. It's been more than 5 years, which is hard to believe since that book has been out. And it's basically a storybook of all the things that I've learned from people on the spectrum, from parents, from children, because I've had the opportunity to work and be in many different situations, everything from a camp counselor to a university professor to working in a hospital to a parent retreat weekend we've been doing for 25 years. And the purpose of the book really was, I guess you could say, to challenge a lot of the myths and to challenge a lot of the stereotypes of the experience of autism. I am not a person on the spectrum. So I just pulled from, all of the people I've known over the years, and especially the last 10 to 15 years. And I think this is illustrated in our new Uniquely Human podcast, that I so value learning from people on the spectrum. But I really always try to be very clear. I wasn't trying to sugarcoat autism. I was definitely trying to present a more positive point of view than most of what you hear and most of what you read. But I was trying to kind of right the playing field to have more of a balance. So I do talk about the challenges, but I also talk about the joys, how fascinating so many people and kids on the spectrum are, to really understand that it's not just quote unquote, a disability or challenge only in the social area or sensory, as many people think, but it's really a different way of organizing information, of seeing the world, and of relating to people and understanding people. And I definitely lean towards feeling that it's a different way. It's in many ways, it's not just less than or deficient. So that was the purpose of the book. And it's been embraced very, very broadly, from parents of newly diagnosed kids to parents of adult children to one of the things that's most gratifying for me, it's been so widely embraced by autistic people. That's actually how I met Dave initially. But so it's been a wonderful trip, and the journey still continues. It's actually, I'll just say it, it's selling more now than it did when it came out. It's a word of mouth book, and the word of mouth and the community is just expanding. And that's also the reason that we decided to do the podcast, to keep the conversation going.
Yeah. And for listeners, if you haven't heard my original interview with Barry, I will leave the links in the show notes. You should definitely check it out because we go very deeply into the book. And again, it really impacted me when I read it because it just felt like such a strengths-based approach and a unique way of encouraging parents to reframe their thinking when they might learn that their child is on the spectrum, and also just the experience you have. I mean, your stories, it's just such a lovely read. So, okay. And Dave, I'm newer to your work. I just listened to your book, which is The Journal of Best Practices, a memoir of marriage, Asperger's syndrome, and one man's quest to be a better husband, which was a New York Times bestseller. You were in O Magazine. Like, this was a big book. So can you tell us a little bit about why you wrote it and similarly, how it was received?
Sure. And it's funny to me and humbling to hear you refer to it as my work. Like, I see Barry as having achieved a body of work over a span of a career. My quote, finger quotes, work is just trying to make people laugh. And that's why I wrote the book. So I was diagnosed at age 30. I'd been married for several years. We had 2 kids, had a job, had a mortgage, and everything was very typical looking on the outside. But my wife knew better. She was working in a sort of a contained program in a school district as a speech language pathologist. And at the time, she was already a huge fan of Dr. Prizant, unbeknownst to me. And I had no tie-in with autism as far as I knew. But then she started working with kids with Asperger's syndrome before it was eradicated by the DSM. So she was working with kids with Asperger's and meeting their parents. And that's when she started to realize, like, our marriage at the time was really unraveling on rocky shores, we'll say, but it was pretty bleak. We weren't connected. We didn't even feel like friends anymore. And we'd only been married for about 5 short years at this point. And we were having a very difficult time. And she realized, like, you know what? Dave's behaviors, for as long as I've known him, really resemble the behaviors of some of these parents that I'm meeting or some of these kiddos with Asperger's. And while autism, there were no big red flags at that time for her. Like, she wouldn't say that, hey, I would diagnose you with autism if I were a doctor, because the population she was working with had certain degrees of impairments in very specific areas that I didn't have. So she sat me down and gave me a quiz that introduced me to the notion that I am consistent with the Asperger profile. So then I went and saw a shrink and they stamped me approved, and I got my autism card. So learning about that gave me an opportunity to focus on, yes, our marriage does frankly suck right now. And I would love to make it better. And maybe there's a connection between some of these behaviors that are the result of my own wiring, and how I experience the world and react to it. And maybe there's if I can bridge that gap and learn the behaviors that might make me a more palatable husband, then maybe our marriage can get back on track. But it also gave my wife, Kristen, the opportunity to look at me and say, well, if you look at just the behaviors and you don't consider why the behaviors are happening, and you're married to these behaviors, it's very easy to look at a partner and say, this guy's an a-hole, right? And I totally admit that. But the diagnostic period in my life, she was able to look at me and say, Yeah, he appears to be an a-hole, but not willfully so. And it was the first time she had this moment of, it's not willful, it's just how you're wired, and immediately that makes you not an a-hole, right? It's there's no intent. Barry talks about communicative intent. I guess I would call it, I have no a-hole intentions usually. So I got to work on that. Kristen started working on her own thoughts around what a marriage was supposed to look like and how a husband was supposed to show up. She did a lot of thought work on herself. I did a lot of behavioral work on myself, and we righted the ship. And so I wrote a book about it specifically to make people laugh, because I thought it was a hilarious story about a marriage. And it was the autism community that really embraced the book and said, here's a guy who, it's finally a positive outcome. It's like a positive narrative on this sort of neurologically mixed marriage that so many people have. And I'm finding out, I'm still receiving emails from people saying that, my wife and I are in couples therapy, and the therapist gave us your book as homework. So my book was basically the story of me engineering these, what I call best practices, to become a better husband. And now apparently marriage and family therapists have gotten to this idea, and now they're handing it out to their clients. And I think it's funny because I didn't write it to be a prescriptive book. I wrote it to make people laugh, but it's helping people. And I think sometimes as the writer, you don't get to decide what people see in the writing.
Well, it is very funny. It's also very honest. I've written many books. I've written some that are more personal than others, but I'm listening and I'm like, wow, I feel like it was very brave to be so honest in your writing. And I think that's why it's so powerful. And I will say also, listeners, check out Dave's book. The link will be in the show notes pages, because I too hear from so many parents in my community who have discovered their own differently wiredness, their own neurodifferences through going through the diagnostic process with their children. Their marriages are really struggling, and it's hard. It's really hard. And I feel like your book provides hope. It provides a window into how this can work. And we're going to talk about your podcast in a second, but let me just ask you one more question about this. If there are listeners who are like, oh my gosh, this is, my partner's on the spectrum, but he or she isn't maybe as willing as you were to really go in and do that work and get curious about how to kind of hack yourself for this relationship. So what words of wisdom or encouragement could you provide to listeners in that circumstance?
This is a great question. A diagnosis and embracing your neurological culture, we'll say, isn't for everyone. And I think sometimes, in my case, I was hyper motivated to make these changes because I grew up in a very happy Leave It to Beaver household, and everything was fantastic. So I wanted that in my adult life. Was a very happy, harmonious, very close relationship with my wife. And so I was hyper motivated in that way. And what I'm finding is, as I do a lot of speaking engagements around relationships and we'll say self-hacking. I really like that phrase. I hadn't heard that before. I'm gonna borrow that from you. But the best words of wisdom I have are coming from my wife, Kristen, actually. And what I learned about her experience being married to a difficult partner who wanted to change, she still had her own work to do, which was, I'm going to stop placing expectations on Dave for how I need him to show up in order for me to feel good about my context, my relationship, my situation, whatever. And that's easier said than done. I know that I don't know if I could actually do it to the extent that she's been able to do it. But I think for partners who are married to a sort of tricky person, and this is both sides, because if you take the perspective of the autistic individual, the neurotypical partner is baffling and very difficult and unreasonable. And I say that as somebody who has been forced to go to weddings and parties and other forms of traditional merriment. So you neurotypicals have fun wrong, I'm telling you. But so we have learned that I need to show up in a way that makes me feel like I'm living my life the right way. in kind of in line with my values. But Kristen really had the extremely heavy lifting of asking herself, why do I need Dave? Of all people, there's 7 billion people in the world. So I could probably find the right match. Why do I need him to act in a checklist, check all those boxes, and then I'll be happy? When if I can make myself happy and create a context that is fulfilling for me, I can free Dave up to be himself, to be grumpy when we have people over to the house, to be itchy in the wrong sweaters, right? Like, be you. I can love you for what that is because I don't need you to check all these other boxes. And that's the heavy lifting that I think gets a lot of couples to where they need to be. If they're looking at sort of a disconnect, it really is freeing up your partner from your expectations of them, frees you up to love them for who they are. And you fell in love with them for a reason. And I think that's sort of the North Star. If people can see that and then point their ship in that direction, yeah, it's hard. It's every day is work, but there's also a lot of really great days. And I think that the number of great days eventually wins, so it's a lot of work, but it's a worthy undertaking. And if you're committed to it and you're committed to the relationship, it can work, and you can both be very happy. So I think we're proof of that, and it's kind of cool. But like I said, it's easier said than done.
and if I might add, if you see Dave and Kristen present together, then you see what Dave's talking about in real time. Like, it's almost like there's a conscious decision around issues that you could go to a dark place, you could go to a heavy place, but just stepping back and that ability to have a kind of a meta look at what's going on, and then pointing out kind of the absurdity in some cases or the humor in some cases, and the lightness. And it's interesting because maybe this is a little bit of a stretch, but I find parents of differently wired kids, parents of kids on the spectrum, humor helps them get through so many circumstances rather than going down the dark path. They like the absurdity of what's going on.
Yes. And there is a lot of absurdity. That's the great thing about autism by itself, not funny. Neurotypicality by itself, definitely not funny. But the tension of opposites when you get a neurologically mixed group is hilarious. So that's a really good point, Barry. Is that Kristen and I both laugh at things now that were very difficult to laugh at for the period of it.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50.
And just to be clear, I'm not talking about when there's real suffering.
Right.
When a child has physical pain or a child has such extreme anxiety that they can't even get out of the basement. But I'm talking about all of those other issues that sometimes get blown up into huge issues. And some people make the decision, we're not going to go to that path on that. So
that's right. And isn't that the crux of marriage? Like we can take Asperger's and autism right out of my book. And at the end of the day, it's relationships.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thank you for that response. And in your answer too, I'm getting a glimpse into why you two as a partnership probably work so well. I mean, I've heard your podcast so far, and I know that you do work well together. So can you talk about your relationship, how you connected and how you decided we need to do something together?
Well, I'll start and then I'll pass it on to Dave. We came together because of a project that failed miserably.
That's a great start.
Most of the stories involving me begin that way.
So without getting into the weeds, there was a vision to develop this great center, and 2 of the people, actually, it was part of Dave's vision with another person. And basically what happened was things did not come out the way everybody had wished for it to come out, and everybody kind of went their separate ways after about a year and a half, 2 years of planning.
Yeah, right.
And so I got to meet Dave, in the planning process. But Dave originally contacted me, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Dave, because you and the other person saw some things in Uniquely Human, which had, recently come out, and it kind of resonated with kind of the mission of what the center was supposed to be.
Yeah, saw some things might be minimizing a tad. I read the book and thought, this is, if neurodiversity were a religion, this would be the Bible or the Torah or whatever you want to. It was that important that finally somebody was offering a balanced perspective on positive outcomes and meeting the individual where they were at. And so this nonprofit organization that we were trying to stand up together with a bunch of other people, that was really sort of the main narrative of that global center for the advancement of neurodiversity. And I called, I wasn't aware of this, but Barry reminded me a few weeks ago that we met because I called him and said, "Hello, Dr. Barry Prizant." He said, "Yeah." I don't even know how I got your phone number, frankly. We have the same publisher. Maybe that was it. But I said, "You don't know me. My name's Dave, and I love you." And, and so apparently that's what I said. So he sat down and was like, "I'm listening." And so I said, "I got roped into building a nonprofit thing, and I don't know anything about this, but I know your book is right on the money, and I'd like you to join us." And so since I met Barry, I have it's very odd. I'm quite gullible and naive, and in many ways socially not the sharpest tack. But Barry, I've always felt extremely comfortable with, immediate trust, because he sees you and you're safe in his presence. There aren't missteps. You are who you are, and it's wonderful. And I've always had this sort of fondness for our time together. If we would talk for 15 minutes at a conference meeting in passing, or talking on the phone for a couple hours. So I'll speak for Barry. It sounded like earlier this year, I posted something on Facebook, because I also write, engineer, produce, and host a couple other podcasts. And I posted something on Facebook about this technology podcast I'm doing. And he said, "Oh, you're involved in podcasting. I've thought about doing that. What do you think about doing a show together?" And yes, it doesn't matter what the parameters are. Yeah, if it's with you, I'll do it 100%. And we launched the first episode 5 episodes ago, and it's been wonderful. Barry's mind for topics around autism, neurodiversity, child development, communicative situations, or communication, I should say, situations, is his brain just works on the accelerator is always down to the mat, and in every direction. So he's just got so many ideas. And if I can help to sort of be a conduit that gets those ideas in front of even more people, I think it's been really enjoyable for me to work with him in that way.
Yeah, and I really want to point out that, it wasn't so much, oh, Dave, who I've met, does podcasts. Okay, let's do a podcast. I've been thinking about doing a podcast for about 3 years. People who know me and have seen me present say, you just kind of explain complex things in ways that people could understand, and you're a natural to do a podcast. And I said, well, it has to be the right situation and working with the right people. And I never really thought that I would do it as a partnership. I mean, truly, co-hosting, 50-50, we're in there. And then when I realized, and it was a little bit of an epiphany, I didn't know Dave had done that he's an audiophile, my goodness, and he's already has a lot of experience. And then it was like, okay, the moment has come. So when I first asked you about it, I was well into my 3rd year about thinking about doing a podcast, but it never seemed the right place, the right person, and the trust. That's huge. I think the worst situation would be to get into something as intimate as that. Even if the other person's not co-hosting, there's an intimacy around what are they going to edit? What are they going to leave in? What are they going to take out? And so it's just worked beautifully. And it's been fun. It is
fun. It is fun because neither one of us is particularly precious about ourselves. We just my wife has a great expression. She wants to do things that are of service. And I think that, Barry and I, the spirit of the podcast is being of service. And Debbie, I don't know if you've ever seen one of Barry's in-person presentations, which he does like 3,000 a year or something. He's minus the COVID year, which is a big asterisk. He's constantly on the road all over the world presenting and advocating. But as soon as he gets off stage, the line to see him is 500 people deep. And the podcast, I think, is an opportunity for that post on-stage conversation to continue, to take the stories, the wisdom that's contained in that static book. Like you start with the book, but this allows you to then explore further and get more nuance and more information. And so I think that the fun thing for me about the podcast is it gives people that access to Barry and his wisdom. And again, I'm there just having a good time. So I have the selfish end of the bargain where I get to sit there and just crack jokes.
It's good. A yin and yang thing going on. And as someone I'm almost at 5 years of doing this podcast weekly. So
wow,
it's a little relentless, but I can also appreciate how nice it must be to have a partner in crime to do this, to keep it fun and just to have that collaboration. So you talked about going deeper into the concepts of uniquely human. What's kind of how would you summarize the types of conversations that you're having? Maybe talk about some of your guests and really what you're hoping the audience takes away from your show?
Well, we are casting the net broadly. There's no doubt about that. And we speak about that. So, for example, we have a great mind who's not a therapist or clinician, Steve Silberman, author of Neurotribes, who's a friend of actually both of us, all the way to, having parents talking about their children's enthusiasms, bringing a little lightness. And that allows us, and I think one of the things I was hoping for, and it's happening, is it allows us to validate, especially for family members and parents, to validate their own perceptions and intuitions about their family member that they don't get from other places, especially deficit models. So we've had a blast with some enthusiasms, everything from a youngster who loves Rocky and Creed movies and dresses up like them. And when he gets tense and stressed out, he goes and punches a bag and he's memorized all the lines from the movies. To birds, a young man who loves birds. And we have some more, lined up. And we encourage parents and family members to go to our website, which is just uniquelyhuman.com, and fill out a form and send us the enthusiasm. So we try to keep things light. We say that explicitly. We want a lightness. But then, with some of the interviews we've had with people on the spectrum, incredible self-advocates, it gets a little more deep into some of the great, great challenges, like Becca Laurie Hector, especially some people who've been diagnosed as adults, but their lives were miserable before hearing the diagnosis. So my point is that we stretch far and wide because we want to really pull in as many people as possible.
Absolutely.
And we're always evolving. I mean, we're always talking about, can we add, because just in a nutshell, the podcast is structured in a particular way. The first half tends to be somebody we're interviewing on a particular topic or who they are and what they've done. And then we shift where it's Dave and I, and we have our little segment on enthusiasms. We have takeaways. We're thinking of adding a point counterpoint to have different perspectives. So we're evolving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the evolution is fun because it very much like this podcast, it's organic and it's for the audience. I don't think neither Barry nor I are really interested in patting ourselves on the back and really hearing our own voices. It's more about like the evolution of our conversations, and we're both kind of clocking it in real time, is happening because as well as we already knew each other, as we get to know each other, we're starting to realize that we have different perspectives on things, not all out like disagreements, but I'm accessing his wisdom and saying, I never thought of using different language to describe what was going on. Like there's a more proactive or more productive language that we could be using. And I think he's accessing my dim-witted simplicity. Is that fair to say? Where I think he's looking at things. I think he can understand that if you're not a clinician, like I'm the farthest thing from a clinician, I have some pretty dumb questions. And I think my questions are representative of what most of the listeners listening to this thing as parents of newly diagnosed children, they have the same questions that I do, only because I don't pay attention to the fact that I'm on the spectrum until we do an interview like this and somebody reminds me and I think, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. But I don't wear it like I don't go out into the day like I'm ready to start my autistic day. I wake up in the morning and I say, I want to make my eggs and I want to get to work. And so anyway, I think that summarizes or that characterizes why our conversations are so diverse and eclectic. But one thing that I think we do really well, and I will pat myself on the back and say this, one thing I think that we both do really well is we keep a narrative line on the episodes. So we don't stumble into topics. Barry and I will discuss topics, guests, and perspectives for a couple weeks before we turn on the microphones. And it's fun. I know Barry's a drummer. I'm a musician. And it's the same way that you would create music with a band. It's like somebody has to hear this. So rather than winging it, we can still be improvisational, which we are. But the essence of improvisation is having a vocabulary and a point of view. And I think we compose our episodes and our conversations very much the way musicians would compose music. It's a fun project.
We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything. Because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.
And speaking of composing, I mean, I think the other thing that's begun to happen, is going to continue happening, is people that we have both run into in our lives and our careers. We could pull them in. So our music, and Dave does such an incredible job. I mean, I know Matt Savage, the jazz musician on the spectrum. Matt's well into his 20s now. I know him since he was 9 or 10 years of age. When he was a little guy. I mean, and now he's a world-renowned jazz composer and musician, and we're using all of his music. We got in touch with him so we could celebrate his music, and Dave does an incredible job at kind of looking at all of his CDs, all of his recordings, and pulling them in. Now, it's also happening with an old friend of yours for a future podcast. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, that's another. This also speaks to your question, Debbie, about sort of characterizing the nature of the conversations that we're having. If we had an elevator pitch, what would it be? My good friend, his name is Michael Carmine Kregler. And right now he's been a professor at Providence College, right, in Rhode Island. And they had a child on the spectrum, and learned about this just a couple of years ago. So I connected him to Barry. And Mike is a jaw-droppingly amazing composer, and he composed this beautiful choral piece for his son, and he incorporates recordings of his son's vocalizations and babbling and just sounds of childhood into the choral piece. And so we're going to have him on as a guest to talk about what that's like as a parent to have multiple children. One of them happens to have an autism diagnosis. So we truly get to pull exactly who we want to pull into the podcast and hear their perspective. And it's sort of like, I think the podcast is like an opportunity to have a really great dinner party a couple times a month with the best people that you know in your life. That's the best way to describe it. And it feels like that because that's kind of the spirit that we approach this with.
Yeah, we're also making sure we get the voices of autistic people, and not just the people who've published books and give lectures. So whenever possible, and this has started, for our enthusiasms. The first enthusiasm, it was the mom pretty much talking, and we just had a little bit of the youngster's voice. Recent enthusiasm, we had the young man talking about birds. And so, again, we want the voices of kids and people of all abilities. Somebody that if you're a teacher, in middle school, put on a kid who kind of talks like one of your students who's 12 years old. And so that's important to us, and that's going to continue to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, amplifying the voices of people on the spectrum. We have this great opportunity to be a platform for autistic people to shine, and we don't want to get in the way of that. We just want to build the stage for them and step back and let them shine. So it's been really gratifying.
Yeah, it's such a fun medium, especially, we've all written books. We know that what a tedious process that can be. And then you wait a year and a half to 2 years till it actually comes out. And, and now it's like, hey, I have this idea, let's record it. And I love that about this medium, and you can pivot and grow and develop and really finesse the product over time, and your audience will just go right along with it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, because it's sincere. There's a sincerity there. And I know writing my own book, the first draft of Journal of Best Practices, for as much of a hopeful, delightful book as it became with help from an editor, the first draft was like dark humor, dark situations, and woven in. And anytime, like to your point, anytime you're going to sit down and write a book, there's going to be a team of people saying, well, you shouldn't include this. Don't put this in there instead. And the book ends up becoming this very static thing. But this allows you to be sincere, allows your personality to come through because you're not using guarded language all the time. It's fun. And I can see why you've been doing this. I mean, 5 years, that's 260 episodes or something that you've probably recorded. You don't do that because you don't enjoy it. You you have to love doing it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So tell me then, when I launched my podcast, I had a list of my dream guests. I will happily say most of them I've had on at this point, but do you have kind of a wish list for either a couple of topics you really want to bring to the show or a couple of guests you really want to have on?
I could jump right in on this. One of my dream guests is Greta Thunberg. As a matter of fact, 2 nights ago, my wife and I watched the new movie, the documentary about her called I Am Greta. Mm-hmm. And I was aware of her back when she was 14 or 15. She's 17 now. But she talks about her autism and Asperger's very openly from the perspective of, I do what I do, and my commitment is such a firm commitment because this is the way I think. And this is the way I could razor focus on something that I value and that's important to me. So I think she represents a wonderful combination of understanding that her autism gives her the gifts, but she also understands the challenges and the difficulties that she's had in the past. So I would love, as a matter of fact, this morning I was Googling contact Greta Thunberg. Yeah. He's in such demand now, but who knows?
Yeah. If I have one dream guest, it's Scarlett Johansson for all the wrong reasons. I've been calling and she won't answer. It's unbelievable. So maybe appearing on this podcast will finally be the tipping point to me interviewing Scarlett Johansson without a single productive thing that I might ask her.
You never know. You just never know. That's great. So for listeners who want to follow your work, listen to the podcast, can you share how they can tune in? And then any last thoughts before we say goodbye? Anything you want to make sure they take away from this conversation?
Yes. Our podcast, Uniquely Human, is available on all the platforms, and going to uniquelyhuman.com. Every episode is there with show notes and more information about the music from Matt Savage that gets pulled in, and more information about the topic and the guests. And we really want to make it like a hub. And we publish every 2 weeks, and it's also available. I mean, you can subscribe on all these platforms, but even from our own website, we're trying to build this community where you can sign up to be kind of in communication with us on a, for lack of a better phrase, a sort of like a mailing list, but it's not that. It's more about exchanging ideas, right? And it's very interactive rather than just shoving newsletters down your throat. And then, of course, we have all the social media channels. So we've got Facebook covered. That's facebook.com/uniquely human podcast. We're on Instagram and Twitter. And Barry doesn't know this, but I've been tinkering in my little elf shop here. We are about to launch a YouTube channel where a lot of people listen to podcasts on YouTube throughout the workday. And this is something where it'll be a very seamless thing. Just stay on YouTube and you can listen to Uniquely Human, the podcast, on there as well. So Barry, after this, we'll tie out and I'll show you what I've been working on.
Okay, great. Very thorough job, Dave. That's terrific.
It is.
Well, thank you.
Awesome. Anything that you want to add before we say goodbye?
Yeah, one lingering thought for me is that I just feel so grateful because the podcast has become an incredible learning opportunity for me. So, you go back to the well-worn cliche, once you've met one person on the spectrum, you've met one person on the spectrum. But I get to see, after we interview people on the spectrum or talk about ideas out in the field, I really get to see how Dave has different opinions. I won't get into the specifics, but that just happened with two guests that we had. One guest who's saying, I get upset when people with autism just make their whole life about autism. And then we interview another guest who says, I've made my whole life about autism. and Dave has feelings about that and thoughts about that. So for me, my learning is that, okay, now I'm seeing the shades, the different opinions, all people accurately diagnosed on the spectrum, but have very different opinions about how they lead their lives and how they make meaning of autism in their lives.
To piggyback on that, my only two remarks are that this is what Barry just said. It's not at all by accident. It's by design. Barry's acceptance and respect and reverence for the entire spectrum of experiences with autism is very sincere, and it's very important to him that all voices are at the table. So he creates a very, I won't say neutral, but he creates a respectful, safe environment for all of these voices and experiences to be heard. And we need those because we can't just have a Wikipedia generalized version of autism definition out there. Autism is as diverse as humanity itself, it seems. So, and then the second parting thought that I would have is Scarlett Johansson. My phone number, it's 720-254. Well, I'll post it on the link. Your managers can get a hold of me, and let's do it. It's finally time. We've been dancing around this. It's time we have you on the podcast.
Well, if you've seen Marriage Story, you should send her the Journal of Best Practices.
Hey, actually, now we're on to something here.
Mm-hmm. That could be the connection right there.
Right.
Well, Barry and Dave, thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed learning more about your work and both of your books and also just what you're doing together, which I think is fantastic. I subscribed and I look forward to all of your episodes. So again, listeners, Uniquely Human is the podcast and all the links will be in the show notes pages. And thank you so much for coming by the podcast today.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you so much. This is so much fun.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.